The morning sun came through the tall windows of Ashford Palace. It painted everything in soft golden light. Inside the grand palace, a young princess named Eleanor stood alone in her room. She was only 14 years old, but she carried the weight of an entire kingdom on her shoulders. Eleanor wore a simple white dress, but even in simple clothes, her sadness was clear. She looked out at the gardens below, the beautiful gardens where she used to play as a child. Those days seemed very far away now. Everything had changed 1 month ago. It started with whispers in the palace hallways. Then came the phone calls. Then came the arguments. Eleanor could hear her parents fighting in the royal study late at night. Their voices were angry, hurt, and broken. She did not understand what was happening, but she understood that her family, her perfect royal family, was falling apart. Her father was King Richard, the strong leader of a nation. Her mother was Queen Catherine, known for her grace and beauty. They had been married for 20 years. People said they were the perfect couple. Magazines called them the royal love story. But perfection, Eleanor was learning, was sometimes just an illusion. The problem began with business deals. The king had made a major decision about the kingdom's economy without telling the queen. Queen Catherine was angry because she felt her voice was not heard. She was not just a wife. She was also a kingdom advisor. She had studied economics. She had ideas. But the king did not ask her opinion. Things grew worse quickly. Eleanor had a younger brother named Prince Thomas, who was only 10 years old. He was innocent and did not understand the tension. But even he felt something was wrong. He stopped playing his violin. He stopped laughing at dinner. He began to ask Eleanor questions she could not answer. "Why is mother crying?" he asked one evening. Eleanor did not know what to tell him. The palace staff noticed everything, but they said nothing. This was their job, to see everything and say nothing. But Eleanor could see it in their eyes. They felt sad for the royal family, too. 1 week before this morning, something happened that broke Eleanor's heart completely. She was walking to the palace library when she saw her father sitting alone. He was the king. He was supposed to be strong, but he was crying. His face was in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking. Eleanor stood frozen. She had never seen her father cry. When he heard her footsteps, he tried to hide his face quickly. He wiped his tears with his hand like a small boy. He tried to smile, but the smile was broken and sad. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I did not see you there." Eleanor wanted to run to him. She wanted to hug him and tell him everything would be okay. But she did not know if that was true anymore. She was afraid that nothing would be okay again. "Father," she whispered, Are you okay?" The king looked at his daughter. In that moment, he was not a king. He was just a man who had made mistakes. He was a man whose marriage was breaking. He was a man who felt like a failure. "I am not okay, Eleanor," he said honestly. "And I am sorry. I am sorry that you have to see this." That same night, Eleanor heard her parents' worst argument. They screamed at each other about trust, about respect, about love. The queen said words that made Eleanor's stomach hurt. She said maybe the marriage was a mistake. She said maybe they wanted different things in life. The king said nothing for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. "Perhaps we should not have married for duty," he said quietly. "Perhaps we should have married for love." Those words stayed with Eleanor. They meant that her parents' marriage had been about kingdom rules and political power, not about true love. It meant that neither of them had really chosen the other. The kingdom had chosen for them. Eleanor realized that night that adults were not as strong as she thought they were. Adults could hurt just like children. Adults could be afraid. Adults could make big mistakes and not know how to fix them. Now, standing at her window the next morning, Eleanor watched the gardeners working below. They did not know about the breaking family inside the palace. They just worked and lived their simple lives. Eleanor almost wanted to trade places with them. A knock came at her door. "Come in," Eleanor said softly. It was her mother. The queen looked tired. Her eyes were red from crying. She was still beautiful, but now her beauty looked fragile, like it could break at any moment. The queen sat on Eleanor's bed and said nothing for a long time. Then she reached out and took her daughter's hand. "I am sorry, my daughter," the queen said. "I am sorry that we failed you. I am sorry that we did not protect your childhood from our problems." Eleanor felt tears come into her own eyes now. "What will happen to us?" Eleanor asked. "Will our family stay together?" The queen took a long breath. She seemed to be thinking very carefully about what to say next. "I do not know," she said truthfully. "But I know this. No matter what happens between your father and me, we both love you and Thomas more than anything. That is real. That will never change." Eleanor held her mother's hand tighter. This was the truth that nobody talked about in royal families. Behind the crowns and the ceremonies, behind the perfect photographs and the public smiles, there were real people with real hearts that could break. 3 days passed since the queen spoke to Eleanor in her room. 3 days of silence. 3 days of pretending everything was normal when nothing was normal anymore. The palace had become a place of secrets. The king slept in a different room now. The staff whispered when they thought no one was listening. The queen spent most of her time in her private study, making phone calls behind closed doors. Eleanor could hear her mother's voice, sometimes sad, sometimes angry, but never happy. Prince Thomas was suffering the most. The 10-year-old boy did not fully understand what was happening, but he understood enough to know something was terribly wrong. He stopped eating breakfast. He did not want to go to his lessons. He followed Eleanor everywhere like a lost puppy, needing to know that at least one person in the family was still there for him. On the 4th morning, everything got worse. Eleanor was walking through the palace corridors toward the dining room when she heard shouting. Her heart immediately started beating very fast. She knew that voice. It was her father's voice, and he was very angry. "This is not just your decision," the king was shouting. "This family is my family too. You cannot do this alone." Eleanor ran toward the sound. She found her parents in the throne room. It was the most formal and grand room in the entire palace. Kings made important decisions about the kingdom in this room. But today, it was where her parents were breaking each other's hearts. "I have made my decision," the queen said coldly. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. I need time away from here, away from you." The king's face turned pale. "You are leaving?" he said in disbelief. "You are leaving me? You are leaving our children?" "I am not leaving the children," the queen said firmly. "I am leaving you. The children will stay here. Eleanor is old enough to understand. And Thomas needs stability." Eleanor felt the room spinning around her. Her mother was leaving, not just for a day or a week, but actually leaving. She was going to stay with her sister. She was going to leave the palace. Eleanor made a small noise without meaning to. Both her parents turned and saw her standing in the doorway. Shock appeared on both their faces. "Eleanor," the queen said, moving toward her daughter. "I did not know you were there." But Eleanor stepped backward. She could not let her mother touch her right now. If her mother touched her, Eleanor would fall apart completely. She would cry and scream and break into pieces. When Eleanor asked quietly. The queen looked at the king, then back at Eleanor. "Tomorrow," the queen said. "I am leaving tomorrow morning." Eleanor felt like the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. Tomorrow. Her mother was leaving tomorrow. That meant tonight would be the last night her mother slept in the palace. Tomorrow morning, her mother would be gone. "Does Thomas know?" Eleanor asked. "No," the king said. "We were going to tell you both together. We wanted to explain." "Explain what?" Eleanor said, and now her voice was shaking. "Explain that our family is broken? Explain that you two failed? I am not a child anymore. I can see the truth." The queen reached out for Eleanor again. "My daughter, please. We love you. This is not about you. This is about your father and me. We simply cannot." "Cannot what?" Eleanor interrupted. "Cannot stay together? Cannot try harder? Cannot think about what this does to me and Thomas?" Eleanor surprised herself. She had never spoken to her parents this way. Royal children were taught to be respectful, to bow, to say only proper things. But Eleanor was not thinking about being royal anymore. She was thinking about being a daughter whose family was falling apart. The king looked more sad than Eleanor had ever seen him. "You are right," he said quietly. "You are absolutely right, and I am sorry." But saying sorry did not fix anything. Eleanor ran from the throne room. She ran through the palace corridors, past the confused staff members, and up the stairs to her room. She locked the door and threw herself on her bed. She cried so hard that she could barely breathe. An hour later, there was a gentle knock on her door. "Eleanor?" It was Thomas's voice. "Eleanor, are you in there?" Eleanor wiped her face quickly. She could not let her little brother see her like this. She was supposed to be the strong one now. "Come in," she said, trying to sound normal. Thomas opened the door. He was holding his toy soldier, the same toy soldier he had carried everywhere when he was smaller. He only took it out when he was very scared. "Mother told me she was going away," Thomas said. His little voice was breaking. "Eleanor, why is she leaving? Did we do something wrong?" Eleanor's heart broke all over again. She sat up on her bed and held out her arms. Thomas ran to her and climbed into her lap, even though he was getting too big to sit on his sister's lap. "No, Thomas," Eleanor said, holding him tight. "You did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. Mother and father did nothing wrong. Sometimes they just cannot be together anymore. But that does not mean they love us less. Will Mother come back?" Thomas asked, his voice small like a whisper. Eleanor did not know the answer. She did not know if her mother would come back permanently. She did not know if her parents would divorce. She did not know what would happen to her family. "I do not know," Eleanor said honestly, "but I know that I am here, and I am not going anywhere. I promise." Thomas held Eleanor very tight. They sat together on the bed in silence. Outside, the palace gardens continued to bloom. The sun continued to shine. The world continued to move forward. But inside Eleanor's heart, time had stopped. That night, Eleanor heard her mother packing. She heard the sound of suitcases being opened. She heard her mother's footsteps going back and forth. And she heard something else, her mother crying quietly in her own room. Eleanor did not go to her mother. She stayed with Thomas, who had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion and sadness. The next morning, Eleanor watched from a window as her mother's car drove away from Ashford Palace. The Queen did not look back. 1 week had passed since the Queen left Ashford Palace. 1 week felt like 1 year to Eleanor. The palace had changed. It was hard to explain exactly how, but everything was different. The colors seemed less bright. The room seemed quieter. Even the servants moved more carefully, as if they were afraid to make any noise that might disturb the sadness that hung over everything. Eleanor and Thomas had fallen into a new routine. In the morning, Eleanor made sure Thomas ate breakfast. At noon, she helped him with his lessons, even though neither of them could concentrate very well. In the evening, they ate dinner with their father in the huge dining room that now felt too big and too empty. The king was not okay. Anyone could see this. He looked like he had not slept in days. His face was gray and tired. He often stared at nothing, his food untouched on his plate. He spoke very little, and when he did speak, his voice was quiet and sad. On the 8th day, something happened that made Eleanor realize how serious everything was. Eleanor was in the library reading a book, or at least pretending to read it, when she heard her father talking to the Prime Minister in his private study. The door was slightly open. She did not mean to listen, but she could hear their voices. "Your Majesty," the Prime Minister was saying, "the people are asking questions. They see the Queen is not at public events. The newspapers are starting to wonder. We need to give them an explanation." Eleanor's stomach tightened. The newspapers. That meant the whole kingdom would soon know about her parents' separation. "Tell them the Queen is visiting her family," the king said wearily. "Tell them she will return soon." "But she will not return soon, will she?" the Prime Minister asked gently. The king did not answer. The silence was answer enough. "We must prepare a statement," the Prime Minister continued. "The people love the royal family. They need to understand what is happening. Your Majesty, you must consider what this means for the throne, for the kingdom." Eleanor could not hear her father's response, but she heard him ask the prime minister to leave. That evening, Eleanor made a decision. She needed to talk to her father, not as a princess to a king, but as a daughter to her dad. She found him in his private study. Sitting alone in the darkness, she turned on the light softly. "Father," she said. The king looked up, surprised to see his daughter. "Eleanor," he said, "what are you doing here so late?" "I need to talk to you," Eleanor said. "May I sit down?" The king nodded and pointed to the chair across from him. Eleanor sat down. She took a deep breath. She did not know exactly what she wanted to say, but she knew she had to try. "I heard you talking to Prime Minister," she said. "I know the newspapers will find out about Mother. I know everyone in the kingdom will know." The king looked uncomfortable. "I am sorry you heard that," he said. "That is not important," Eleanor said. "What is important is that Thomas and I need to understand what is happening. We need to know the truth, not the stories from the newspapers, but the real truth." The king looked at his daughter. She could see something in his eyes change. He seemed to see her truly for the first time in days, not as a princess, but as a person with real feelings and real needs. "You are right," he said. "You deserve the truth." He stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the dark gardens. "Your mother and I have loved each other," he began slowly. "But sometimes love is not enough. We married because it was our duty to the kingdom. We had children because it was expected. We created a perfect image because that is what royal families do. But inside, Eleanor, inside we were very unhappy." Eleanor listened without interrupting. "Your mother is a brilliant woman," the king continued. "She has ideas and dreams of her own. But I did not listen to her. I treated her like a decorative piece in the palace, not like a partner. I made decisions without her. I ignored her voice. And now, she has decided that she cannot live like that anymore." The king turned back to face Eleanor. "That is not her fault," he said. "That is my fault. I failed as a husband, and I am deeply ashamed of that." Eleanor felt tears come in her eyes again, but these tears were different. They were not just tears of sadness. They were also tears of understanding. "Do you love her?" Eleanor asked. The king was quiet for a long moment. "I think I love the idea of her," he said sadly. "But I do not think I ever really knew her. And that is a different thing." Over the next few days, things began to change slowly. The king seemed to be trying harder. He spent time with Thomas, helping him with his lessons and playing games with him. He spoke to Eleanor about real things, not royal things, but real things. He asked her what she was feeling. He listened to her answers. One evening, a letter arrived from the queen. Eleanor recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope. Her heart raced. The letter was for both Eleanor and Thomas. The queen wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she loved them very much. She wrote that she was staying with her sister and thinking about what she wanted to do with her life. She wrote that this was not about them. It was about her finding her own happiness again. The queen also wrote something that surprised Eleanor. "I am going to be starting a school for young girls," the queen had written. "A school where girls can learn to think for themselves, to have their own voices, and to know that they matter. This is something I always wanted to do, but I was too busy being a queen. Maybe losing the palace was the only way I could find myself." Eleanor read this part several times. Her mother was not just running away. Her mother was building something new. Her mother was finding her own path. A few days later, Eleanor's father read her a letter from her mother addressed to him. She could see him cry as he read it. Not sad tears this time, but different tears. The tears of a man who finally understood something important. The king called Eleanor and Thomas together. "Your mother and I are going to speak to each other again," he said. "Not today, but soon. We do not know if we will be together again, but we are going to try to be kind to each other, and we are going to always be your parents, no matter what happens." Eleanor felt something very small begin to heal inside her chest. It was not happiness. Not yet, but it was hope. And hope, she was learning, was sometimes enough to start again. 2 weeks later, a car arrived at Ashford Palace. Eleanor watched from a high window as her mother stepped out. The queen looked different. She was wearing simpler clothes than before, no jewels, no crown, just a simple blue dress. But she looked more peaceful than Eleanor had ever seen her. Eleanor's heart was beating very fast. She did not know what would happen today. Would her parents argue again? Would they cry? Would they decide to divorce? She did not know, and the not knowing was almost worse than knowing a bad thing. Thomas was waiting in the main hall. He had been waiting since morning, not wanting to do anything in case he missed his mother's arrival. When he saw the Queen, he ran to her without thinking. The Queen bent down and held her son very tightly. "My sweet boy," she whispered, "I have missed you so much." Thomas cried. He cried like he had been holding the tears inside for all 2 weeks. The Queen held him and let him cry. Eleanor stood on the stairs watching. Her mother looked up and saw her. Their eyes met across the distance. Eleanor could see her mother's eyes were red from crying too. Eleanor came down the stairs slowly. "Hello, Eleanor," the Queen said softly. "Hello, Mother," Eleanor replied. They hugged, but it was not like the hug with Thomas. It was careful and uncertain. Both Eleanor and her mother seemed afraid to break something very fragile. The king appeared from his study. He saw his wife and his face changed. Eleanor could not read his expression. Was it love? Regret? Pain? It seemed to be all these things at once. "Catherine," he said, using her real name instead of "Your Majesty. Thank you for coming." "I came for the children," the Queen said. "But also, I came because I think we need to talk. Really talk. Not argue. Not pretend. Just talk." The king nodded. "Will you stay for dinner?" he asked. "Yes," the Queen said. "I will stay for dinner." Eleanor felt her shoulders relax a little. At least they were not going to fight immediately. The afternoon passed slowly. Eleanor and Thomas spent time with their mother. The Queen told them about the school she was building. She explained how she had always wanted to help young girls understand that they had value, that their voices mattered, that they could do anything they wanted in life. "I realized something while I was away," the Queen told them. "I realized that I gave up my own dreams to be a queen. And then I blamed your father for my unhappiness. But that was not fair. I made choices too. I chose to stay quiet. I chose to not fight for what I wanted." Eleanor listened carefully. She was beginning to understand something about adults that she had never understood before. Adults were not either good or bad. They were complicated. They made mistakes. They hurt people they loved. And sometimes they tried to learn from those mistakes. At dinner, the king and queen sat opposite ends of the long table. Thomas and Eleanor sat between them. The atmosphere was very quiet and careful. The king spoke first. "Catherine, I have had time to think about many things," he said. "I have realized that I was a poor husband. I did not listen to you. I did not respect your intelligence. I treated you as a decoration instead of as a partner." The queen listened without interrupting. "I cannot change the past," the king continued, "but I want you to know that I understand now. I understand why you left, and I do not blame you." The queen looked at her husband for a long moment. "I did not come here to hear you take all the blame," she said, "because that is not fair either. I could have spoken up more. I could have been braver. I could have told you how I felt instead of just accepting everything. I made myself small, and then I was angry at you for not seeing how small I had become." The king reached across the table slowly. He did not grab the queen's hand. He just moved his hand toward hers and waited. The queen looked at his hand. Then, slowly, she placed her hand on his. "I do not know if we can go back to the way things were," the queen said. "But I think maybe we can go forward in a new way." Eleanor's heart jumped. Was her mother saying they might get back together? But the king shook his head slowly. "I do not think we should try to go back," he said. "I think we should try something different. I think we should try being honest. I think we should try being partners who respect each other, even if we are not husband and wife." The queen nodded. "I think so, too," she said. Eleanor did not fully understand what her parents were saying, but she understood that they were not yelling. They were not angry. They were being kind to each other. "What does this mean?" Thomas asked in a small voice. "Will Mother stay?" The king and queen looked at each other. "I will stay some nights," the queen said. "And other nights, I will go back to my sister's house." but I will not disappear. I will always be your mother, and your father will always be your father. But will you still be husband and wife?" Eleanor asked. The queen and king exchanged a look that Eleanor could not quite read. "We do not know yet," the king said honestly, "but we are going to try to figure out together. We're going to try to be a real family, even if it looks different from before." That night, Eleanor helped her mother settle into a guest room. The queen held her daughter's hand. "I am sorry that I could not be stronger for you," the queen said. "I am sorry that you had to see your parents fail." "You did not fail," Eleanor said. "You learned. You changed. You are building something new. That is not failure. That is bravery." The queen pulled Eleanor close. "You are so wise for 14 years old," she whispered. After Eleanor's mother was settled, Eleanor found her father in his study. "Father?" she said. "Yes, Eleanor," he replied. "Are you okay?" she asked. The king looked tired, but also more peaceful than he had looked in weeks. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm going to be okay. And that is different. That is progress." That night, for the first time in 2 weeks, Eleanor slept deeply and without nightmares. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if her parents would ever truly be together again. But she knew something important now. She knew that her family could break and still matter. Her family could change and still be a family. Her family could be imperfect and still be love. In the morning, when Eleanor came down to breakfast, she saw something that made her smile. Her mother and father were sitting together, drinking tea. They were not touching. They were not smiling big smiles. But they were talking. They were listening to each other. And in that simple moment of listening, Eleanor saw the smallest beginning of healing. It was not the ending she had hoped for, but it was real. And real, she was learning, was sometimes more beautiful than perfect. 1 year had passed. The seasons had changed completely. The gardens of Ashford Palace bloomed in spring, turned golden in summer, grew quiet in autumn, and now lay sleeping under winter snow. And through all these changes, the royal family had also changed. Eleanor was now 15 years old. She stood in her mother's new office at the Academy for Young Women, the school her mother had built with her own hands and her own dreams. The school was small but beautiful. There were only 30 girls, but each one of them was learning something that Eleanor's mother had desperately wanted to learn at their age: how to think for themselves, how to use their voices, and how to believe that they mattered. "What do you think, Eleanor?" her mother asked, pointing to a new building they were constructing. "This will be the science laboratory. I want the girls to do experiments. I want them to discover things. I want them to know that girls can be scientists and engineers and leaders." Eleanor smiled at her mother. The queen was completely different now. She did not wear a crown anymore. She wore simple clothes. She had wrinkles from smiling and working hard. She was happier than Eleanor had ever seen her. "I think it is perfect, Mother," Eleanor said. "The girls will love it." The queen put her arm around her daughter. "You know, if I had stayed in that palace trying to be the perfect queen, I would have missed all of this," she said. "I would have missed becoming who I really am." Eleanor thought about this. Her mother was right. Her mother had found something real by breaking away. She had found purpose. She had found herself. Things at the palace were different too, but also better. The king and queen had not gotten back together. Everyone in the kingdom now knew this. At first, the newspapers were full of stories about the royal separation. But slowly, people began to understand. The king had given a speech explaining that the queen was pursuing her own dreams and that they were trying to be good parents to their children, even if they were no longer husband and wife. It was not a traditional ending, but it was honest. The king had also changed. He worked with advisors now, including Eleanor's mother, on important decisions. He listened to different opinions. He admitted when he was wrong. He was still the king, but he was a better king because he had learned to respect the people around him. Thomas, now 11 years old, was doing much better. He still struggled sometimes with the separation, but he had learned something important from watching his parents. He had learned that love was not about staying in the same house. Love was about respecting each other and caring about each other's happiness. Thomas spent time with both his parents. Some weeks he stayed at the palace with his father. Other weeks he stayed at his mother's small house near the academy. He even helped his mother with the school sometimes, helping the younger girls with their reading. The most surprising thing was that the king and queen had become real friends. They would have tea together sometimes and actually talk, not about royal business, but about real things. The king attended some of the events at his wife's academy. The queen came to state dinners at the palace when it was necessary. They were not romantic partners anymore, but they were partners in being good parents, and that mattered more than Eleanor had ever expected. One evening, Eleanor's father called her to his study. "Eleanor, I want to talk to you about something," the king said. Eleanor felt a little nervous. Was something wrong again? "I want to give you a choice," her father continued. "When you turn 18, you do not have to be a princess if you do not want to be." Eleanor was shocked. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean," the king said slowly, "that being royal has brought me both joy and suffering. I have spent my whole life doing what was expected of me, and I have realized that I do not want that for you. I want you to have choices. If you want to be a princess, you can be. If you want to go to university and study something you love, you can do that too. If you want to help your mother with her academy, you can do that. The throne does not have to be your future unless you want it to be." Eleanor felt tears come in her eyes. This was a gift her father was offering her, the gift of choice, the gift of being able to decide her own life. "Thank you," she whispered. "Your mother gave up a year of her life to find out who she really was." The king said, "I do not want you to wait that long. I want you to discover yourself now, while you are young." That winter, something happened that made Eleanor understand everything completely. The king, queen, Eleanor, and Thomas all gathered for Christmas dinner. But this time, it was not in the formal palace dining room. It was in the queen's small house, in a warm kitchen with a simple wooden table. The queen had cooked the meal herself. There was no palace staff, no servants, no ceremony, just a family eating together. As they passed the food around the table, Thomas asked a question. "Mother, father, are you sad that you are not together anymore?" The king and queen looked at each other. "Sometimes," the queen said honestly, "I am sad for what we lost, but I am happy for what I have found." "I am sad too," the king said, "but I am also proud. I am proud of your mother for being brave, and I am proud of you both for being strong. Are you still a family?" Thomas asked. "Yes," both parents said at the same time. "We are just a different kind of family," the queen explained. "We love each other differently now, but we still love each other." Eleanor understood then. Her family had not been destroyed. It had been transformed. It was no longer a perfect picture in a magazine. It was real. It was messy and complicated and honest. And because it was real, it was beautiful. After dinner, Eleanor sat by the window watching the snow fall. Her mother came and sat beside her. "Do you think you made the right choice?" Eleanor asked. "Leaving the palace?" The queen looked out at the snow for a long time before answering. "I think I made the brave choice," she said. And brave is not always the same as right or wrong. Brave is just brave. It is stepping into the unknown and trusting that you will figure it out. "I want to be brave like that," Eleanor said. "You already are," the queen said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You have watched your family break and helped put it back together in a new way. You have supported your brother. You have loved your father even when he was failing. That is the bravest thing anyone can do." Eleanor leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Outside, the snow continued to fall silently on Ashford Palace and the gardens beyond. The kingdom continued. The people continued. And the royal family, broken and rebuilt, failed in learning, imperfect and real, continued forward together. Eleanor realized that this was a real story, not the story of a perfect family that never had problems, but the story of a family that had problems and faced them honestly, a family that broke and learned to love each other differently, a family that chose truth over pretense and real connection over perfect appearance. This was not the ending Eleanor had expected when her mother left a year ago, But it was better, because it was true. And in a world full of stories that were too perfect to be real, this family had finally become real. And that made all the difference.